LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out 29 of the weekend's best clips for what should be an interesting show for you all tonight. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. And as usual, I'll have some political comedy clips for you from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher from last Friday night. As for this week's topics, you can see all the topics I'm covering listed down in the video description, and if you're watching the recorded version of the show, you should also see time indexes down there to skip to the topics that most interest you. Again, I'll be starting with the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign, which again took up the bulk of the Sunday morning news shows. This week, well, I'll start again with the 2016 presidential race on the Republican side. Donald Trump mercifully did not appear or phone into any of the Sunday morning news shows, though Trump is the front runner, and so he will be the topic of most of the dozen clips I have on the Republican side this week. I'll also have about that number of clips on the Democratic side, including several clips of Bernie Sanders from both ABC and CNN. I'll also have 4 clips on the topic of guns after that on-air shooting of local TV news journalists this week, including a pretty despicable one from Fox News Sunday, I think, and then one where the parents of one of the victims make a CNN anchor cry. Then at the end, I'll have a few clips on ISIS and the radicalization of Muslims, including a borderline Islamophobic comment from Bill Maher. But first, I want to start with Bill Maher talking not about Muslims, but about Donald Trump, more specifically about how he's trying really hard not to talk about Donald Trump, over in this clip.
Now, have you detected what's going on here tonight? I am trying to avoid talking about Donald Trump. That's really what this is all about so far. And yet it's impossible. I mean, he's everywhere on the media. These fucking people. CNN could not be any more obsessed with Donald Trump if that missing plane turned up in his hair. Which it could. His hair.
And I kind of relate to what Bill Maher was saying there because I'm gotten some complaints from viewers about having to spend so much time covering Donald Trump on my Sunday clip roundup, but given that I'm taking my clips mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows, I kind of necessarily have to spend a significant amount of time covering the Republican frontrunner of all things, Donald Trump. Though, as I said earlier, the Trump coverage will be a little lighter this week because Trump wasn't on any of the Sunday morning shows, but he was still setting the agenda on the Republican side. In some ways, a stronger front runner on the Republican side than Hillary Clinton is on the Democratic side, and that's what ABC's Jonathan Karl pointed out in a news report covering both Hillary and the Donald as a tale of two frontrunners in a story which I cut a little of Universal's copyrighted material out of the beginning because it was an old movie version of A Tale of Two Cities, but then it continues for about almost 2 minutes in this clip.
The Republican establishment fretting their frontrunner is too strong and could actually win. Democratic establishment fretting theirs is too weak and could actually lose. While Hillary Clinton has a comfortable lead in national polls, she's already trailing a 73-year-old self-described socialist in New Hampshire. And now Bernie Sanders is surging in Iowa as well. Despite yet another mea culpa over her private home email server.
I should have used 2 emails, one personal, one for work. And I take responsibility for that decision.
Doubts over her email account, still under investigation by the FBI, are taking a toll. 61% of voters now say she's untrustworthy. While some Democrats are urging Vice President Biden to jump in, handing out these candy bars at this week's DNC meeting. Trump, meanwhile, is having the time of his life, riding high in the early states, riding high nationally, seemingly riding high everywhere. Top Republicans are worried he's alienating key voting groups. Jeb Bush even making his own trip to the border to trash Trump's plan to deport undocumented immigrants.
His proposal is unrealistic. It will cost hundreds of billions of dollars. It will violate people's civil liberties.
But perhaps the biggest attack on the frontrunners comes not from their opponents, but from voters. A recent poll asking for the first words that come to mind about each of them. For Hillary Clinton, liar, dishonest, untrustworthy. For Donald Trump, arrogant, blowhard, idiot. So much for great expectations for either frontrunner. For this week, Jonathan Karl, ABC News.
So that was the Dickensian-themed report from ABC's Jonathan Karl about both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, but that report didn't actually include one of the most outrageous Donald Trump incidents of the week, in which Trump kicked out of a news conference the very popular Univision anchor Jorge Ramos, and I'll show you how ABC did cover that, including a clip from an interview with Jorge Ramos in a minute, but first I wanted to show you how Bill Maher covered that incident in his monologue last Friday as Trump expanding his racist appeal over in this clip.
But he seems to be expanding his appeal from hardcore racist to the casual weekend racist. It got ugly this week. Did you see in Iowa with Jorge Ramos? I mean, oh my God. Now, Jorge Ramos, the lead anchor on Univision, and he was at this press conference Donald Trump was giving, and he started to talk, and Trump says to him, go back to Univision. He had him physically thrown out of the room. And of course, Trump's audience is like, see, he doesn't know how to get rid of Mexicans.
So yeah, Donald Trump was not backing off on this ejection of Jorge Ramos from this news conference, which I actually watched when it happened, and I've been toying with putting together this edited, produced video about the war between Fox News and Donald Trump that includes the incident with Jorge Ramos, because Jorge Ramos then went on Megyn Kelly's show and they commiserated about being in the crosshairs of Donald Trump, and that was one clip that I'm not going to show in this broadcast tonight, but I'm thinking of putting in this video that is tentatively titled Fox News, or Donald Trump versus Fox News War Continues. Although I've asked for viewers to say if they want to see that video, and so far no one's actually said they want to see my Fox News versus Donald Trump war video. So let me know if you do want to see that. But I do want to show you, like I said, how ABC covered the conflict between Donald Trump and Jorge Ramos, and how Donald Trump isn't backing down, and then an actual interview by Martha Raddatz, ABC guest host of This Week with George Stephanopoulos, talking to Jorge Ramos over in this clip.
Okay, who's next? Yeah, please. Excuse me, sit down. You weren't called. Sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Go back to Univision. Then all of a sudden, this guy gets up, starts screaming at the top of his lungs. And it was unfair to the other reporters. He was totally out of line. He was screaming and ranting and raving. When this clown, Jose Reyes, or whatever the hell his name, oh, he's a baseball player, Ramos, he actually seemed like a nice guy after he calmed down a little bit.
Donald Trump just won't stop talking about Jorge Ramos, anchor at our sister network Fusion, after that testy exchange over immigration. And Jorge joins us now. Good morning, Jorge. Donald Trump is not backing down. He says he got a lot of credit for the way he handled that. Trump seems to think he benefited from that confrontation. Do you think he benefited among his supporters?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I think it is very important that as journalists we challenge those who are in power. And I think it is very dangerous that he wants to do the largest mass deportation in modern history, that, by the way, would cost more than $137 billion. And I think it is very dangerous that he's promoting in his speeches bigotry and hatred against immigrants and Latinos. Let me just give you a quick example. After I was expelled from that press conference, and in 30 years, this is the first time I've been ejected for asking a question. I saw a man, Trump sympathizer, who told me, get out of my country. Interesting, because I'm also a U.S. citizen. But this happened just seconds after he told me, go back to Univision. So those messages of hatred and bigotry. That's precisely what Mr. Trump is promoting, and that's what he's allowing to come up.
Jorge?
I think Jorge Ramos has a great point there, and I also have sort of saw him talk about that to an even greater extent when he talked to Megyn Kelly on the Kelly File on, I think it was Wednesday. And like I said, I may be making a video that includes that clip. But you would think that Republicans would understand that what Donald Trump is doing is, even though it riles up part of the base, the nativist, sort of racist, anti-immigrant base of the Republican Party, it's making things really bad for the Republicans in the general election because they need Latino votes, which is kind of what Jorge Ramos was saying there. But I want to show you a Tea Party Republican woman in the Congress who just doesn't get it. She's in denial about this whole idea that Republicans are screwing themselves with this Donald Trump rhetoric. This is Representative Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee. I think she's trying to replace Michelle Bachmann as like the person who says outrageous fact-free things in the Congress. And she's the only woman in the Republican leadership in the Congress at the moment, I think. But anyway, here she is over on CNN State of the Union as part of the roundtable, talking to Jake Tapper, saying, well, didn't you see how Donald Trump in this one poll that is different from all the other polls in Nevada actually got 31% of Latino support? And then she is totally in denial about how it's going to affect Republicans when Jake Tapper asks her about it over in this clip.
Look at the Nevada poll, where he's got 28% of the vote, 31% of the Hispanics support Donald Trump.
Every other poll
look
shows
at
that
Peggy Noonan's column yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, where she had talked with people that are Hispanic.
Are you really not concerned
what
at
they
all
want.
about the effect that Donald Trump might have on Latino voters?
I think, Jake, that the fact that Donald Trump is pulling out all voters and is driving the discussion is an important thing. I think that the fact that illegal immigration being there on the front burner is an important thing. It is an issue that has to be addressed. And people want individuals coming into the country, and they're all for legal immigration. They are very concerned about illegal immigration, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking.
I'm not disagreeing with any of that, but just in terms of the sheer politics of it, are you as a Republican leader not concerned by the rhetoric that you hear from Donald Trump? Because I have heard many other Republicans say they are concerned about it.
I think that what he is doing, as so many people will say, I identify with what he's saying because he's concerned about the same issues that I'm concerned about. That's a good thing. And it's important for people to have those discussions. And I think the fact that you're talking about the three top issues, and he goes on stage and talks about these: national security, job and economic security, retirement security.
Got to go right now. Thank you so much, Congressman Blackburn.
I don't know. She seemed pretty clueless about how Trump is ruining the Republicans' chances in the general election with his anti-Latino rhetoric. But, I mean, I guess she's not the only one. Though I want to show a parody based kind of, I guess, on another Republican. Donald Trump used this offensive term, anchor baby, and got Jeb Bush, who was supposedly the moderate, going to be front runner in the Republican race, got him to defend using the term using the term anchor baby. And so I want to show this new rule that Bill Maher did last Friday at the end of his show about how Fox News needs a new kid show on that topic in this clip.
New rule: Fox News must capitalize on the current mood of their viewers and create their very first children's show, Anchor Babies. Laugh and learn along with Jesus, Wang, and Muhammad as they steal your hearts the way they stole their citizenship. They're adorable and they're deportable. They're adorptable.
Anchor babies are adorptable. I don't know. I don't think that's going to become a catchphrase of the election. I hope not, but I thought that was kind of funny from Bill Maher last Friday. Now, I said at the beginning I'm not going to show any actual interview clips of Donald Trump, but that Donald Trump was still kind of setting the Republican agenda, even though he wasn't on any of the shows this week. And I want to show some clips that Chuck Todd put together over on NBC's Meet the Press, showing how even though some candidates are trying to ignore Donald Trump, he's still affecting the way all the Republican candidates are talking about issues. And I'll talk about that a little more after you see that clip here.
Donald Trump that is dictating things, and him being on top is not the surprise this morning. He's been dominating all the polls in every state, the media, and it turns out he's getting into the heads of his opponents as well. We put together some examples of how, just in the past few weeks, when Trump talks, the other Republicans feel forced to respond.
Make America great again. Make America great again.
It's not too late for America. With your help, we can make this country great again.
The issue is not that America isn't great. The issue is that America can be even greater.
We'll call it the Great Wall of Trump.
Secure the border, which means build the wall, have the technology, have the personnel to make sure it's safe and secure.
It is not feasible to build a wall as the sole solution.
No, I'll use the word anchor baby.
Do you regret using the term anchor babies yesterday on the radio?
No, I didn't.
Is that
I don't regret it.
You don't regret it?
No, do you have a better term?
Those are human beings, and ultimately they're people. They're not just statistics.
Now, Rand Paul, you have to understand, is a disaster in the polls. He's a disaster on military and defense. He's getting decimated by everybody.
I think people are going to have to decide whether they want someone who can say, well, she's fat. Yeah, and I'm so good looking. Or she's stupid. Or I'm rich, and I'm smart because I'm rich.
Has anyone ever heard of Lindsey Graham?
If he becomes the nominee, we'll get killed. Come to South Carolina, and I'll beat his brains out.
I think Jeb is a nice person. He's very low energy. I'm not used to that kind of a person.
We need leadership in Washington, D.C. High energy leadership.
Well, there you have it.
So, yeah, there you have the clips of how the Republican candidates are all having to react to Donald Trump and changing their campaigns to try to appeal to the same people who Trump is appealing to mostly. And I want to show also from Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, he had on one of the Republican candidates who was supposed to be a top-tier candidate, was supposed to be doing well in Iowa, from the neighboring state of Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker. And this is Chuck Todd asking him a question from one of his quoting one of his supporters saying that his campaign's in neutral and he doesn't know how to react to the Trump juggernaut. And here you can see how Scott Walker reacted to that question on NBC's Meet the Press this morning here.
Donald Trump that is dictating things, and him being on top is not. Well, the one candidate we didn't mention because he wasn't in the top tier of the polls is my next guest here. We're going to now turn to Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin. He was supposed to be the conservative alternative favorite in this race. The conservative from a Republican from a blue state who beat the unions, got things done. But like many Republican candidates, Walker has been swept away these days by the Trump storm. I sat down with the governor yesterday for a Meet the Candidates interview. Your good friend, the Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark, said just this week, he said your campaign's stuck in neutral and that you need to find a spark to counter the, quote, Donald Trump juggernaut. What do you say to him, and do you agree with him?
It's hard work. It's going out. I was just in Iowa the other day, South Carolina, New Hampshire. It's doing town hall meetings. It's doing the sorts of things that, remember 8 years ago about this time, there was, I think, a pullout in October of 2007. Last time we had an open seat for president, and Hillary Clinton was way ahead of some guy by the name of Barack Obama, and Rudy Giuliani and Fred Thompson were ahead of John McCain and Mitt Romney. So there's a lot of work that goes in these races. For us, I think the biggest spark for us is getting the message out that now's not the time to put in place someone who hasn't been tested before.
New poll that was
So, like I've said in previous shows where I've shown clips of Scott Walker, I just don't find him impressive. I had heard so much about how he was the sleeper front runner, and for a while he was the front runner in Iowa since he came from Wisconsin. But I think he's been kind of underwhelming in the campaign so far. And I'm only going to show one more question of a Republican candidate asked to react to Donald Trump. This is New Jersey Governor Chris Christie over on Fox News Sunday, and this is one of my favorite how do you react to Donald Trump questions, because Governor Chris Christie was supposed to be the straight talking loudmouth guy who told people to sit down and shut up in the audience and told teachers to shut up and all. You know, there used to be all these clips of Chris Christie being the loudmouth, and this is like Chris Wallace in a nice way asking Chris Christie, you know, has Donald Trump like taken over the, you know, has he out-assholed you in this race? Or that's kind of the question, and you can see Chris Christie's answer. And then, let me see, is there a follow-up here? Yeah, and no, it's basically, at the end, you'll see Chris Christie answering, saying that he's kind of like the Trump with political experience. And I'm going to show a couple more Chris Christie clips, but this is my favorite. Are you, you know, how are you reacting to Donald Trump question here?
I think it's fair to say the candidate who's really been hurting you, and perhaps all the other candidates in the race, is Donald Trump. Your campaign slogan is telling it like it is, and a lot of people thought that you would campaign and make your mark as the kind of in-your-face, larger-than-life candidate. But haven't you, to a sense, honestly, been drowned out by Trump?
Well, first of all, I always speak honestly, Chris. And the fact is that, no, listen, there's 17 people in the race. So everyone's going to have their moment to be able to speak their mind and be able to get their message out there. And what I'm going to do over the course of the next 5.5 months before the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary is to get out there and talk about the important issues that people care about and to stand up and put my record and my vision forward for the American people. And you're going to do that no matter who happens to be in first place at any moment in these polls. And now it's Donald. You know, in 3 weeks, it could be somebody else.
But part of this is comparison shopping for the voters. You say, and you've been quoted as saying this week, that some of Trump's solutions, his proposals, are too simplistic, that there's no there.
Well, what I said was that I was asked specifically about the immigration proposal and said it was simplistic, and I put forward a much more detailed proposal than that. And yeah, that is comparison shopping, but the comparison shopping is not only about personality, it's also about ideas, and it's about who can get it done. You know, and when you look at what I've done in New Jersey, Chris, every day in a state it's one of the most democratic states in the country, a Democratic legislature every day, still cut business taxes, still created nearly 200,000 jobs in the last 5.5 years in a state that had no private sector jobs grown in the 8 years before I became governor. So we're doing the things that need to be done. We've shown we can do it. And I'll tell you this, the guy who vetoed 400 bills so far as governor of New Jersey, the guy who's vetoed more income tax increases than any governor in American history, is the guy to send over to Capitol Hill to get Congress in line, because nobody likes what's going on in that building.
So like I said, I think in that clip, Chris Christie tried to say that he is the straight-talking Donald Trump type, but he has political experience to actually know how to get things done. I don't know if you agree with that interpretation of that answer, but like I said, I found that question to be kind of amusing. And the next clip I want to show, also from Governor Chris Christie talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. This includes a clip of Hillary Clinton that I saw over and over again on Fox News this week. It was like designed to get the Republicans all riled up, and it did get the Republicans all riled up. She compared the Republican war on women, or I guess the so-called war on women, to the extremists over in the Middle East who also are not very favorable to women's rights. And one of the things I found kind of amusing about this question that Chris Wallace asked is he didn't just call it the so-called war on women. He said what Hillary Clinton calls the so-called war on women, which I don't think Hillary Clinton actually calls it. I think Chris Wallace went just a little bit too far in saying, I don't believe in the war on women in his question. And then you'll hear Chris Christie give an answer that it's, you know, first attacking Hillary Clinton and then attacking Planned Parenthood is like selling baby parts, and it's worth watching over in this clip.
Those things 180 degrees opposite.
All right. Hillary Clinton went after Republicans again this week for what she calls the so-called war on women. Take a look.
Extreme views about women, we expect that from some of the terrorist groups. We expect that from people who don't want to live in the modern world. But it's a little hard to take coming from Republicans who want to be the president of the United States.
Now, she didn't mention you by name, but you are one of the Republican candidates who wants to defund, and in fact, in the state of New Jersey, you have defunded Planned Parenthood. What do you think of that comparison?
Well, there's a uniter, isn't it? comparing Republicans to terrorist groups. There's a real uniter. That's the woman you want sitting in the Oval Office to bring our country back together. That's a disgrace, and she's a disgrace. The fact is this.
Wait. Hillary Clinton is a disgrace?
She's a disgrace for saying that, for comparing Republicans to terrorist groups. Don't let her go on that, Chris. That's awful.
I was nowhere near Iowa
that's
at the
a disgrace. That's a disgrace. It is a disgrace. Can you imagine if we compared the Democratic Party to terrorist groups? Can you imagine the outrage in the mainstream media for that? Yet she stood up there right then and said that Republicans are like terrorist groups. Well, here's what I don't think mainstream America is for. I don't think mainstream America is for an organization getting federal funding who kills children in the womb in a particular way so that it maximizes the value of their body parts on the open market for sale for profit. Now, if Mrs. Clinton thinks that's what mainstream America likes, I'm happy to have that debate with her. But of course, she won't even answer those questions because she doesn't even want to talk about what's really going on at Planned Parenthood. She just wants to talk about these vague generalities about war on women. But I'm not going to be someone who's going to stand up and allow her to call my party terrorists.
Okay.
Because we're not. And I'll say one other thing. I can't wait till next September to get on stage with Hillary Clinton as the Republican nominee. And the people in your audience know there will be no one better to prosecute the case for an optimistic, hopeful, better America and against that kind of garbage than I would be against Hillary Clinton.
Well, let's.
So, like I said, at the beginning of that question, I thought Chris Wallace went a little out of his way to distance himself from the war on women, and I thought that was a little biased. But also, at the very end of the interview with Chris Christie, there was this weird moment where he complimented Chris Christie on, what great form he's in. I think he said that he was in mid-season form, and that I'll show you what the governor of New Jersey responded that got Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday, to kind of like crack up and lose it for a minute over in this clip.
Christie, thank you. Thanks for talking with us.
Great to be on.
You're
Chris.
in mid-season form, aren't you?
You got it, baby. I'm hot. Ready to go.
I don't think I've ever had a candidate. Donald Trump might say that. I'm hot, baby. All right, up next. Our Sunday group joins us.
Chris. Gather yourself.
Up next, our Sunday group joins us to discuss another remarkable week. Why aren't they laughing? Remarkable week for both Republicans and Democrats in the race for the White House. Plus, what do you think about Hillary Clinton comparing some GOP candidates to terrorists? Let me know on Facebook or Twitter at Fox News Sunday. And use the hashtag FNS.
That's kind of a weird question, weird way to frame the issue. What do you think about Hillary Clinton comparing Republicans to terrorists? It seems to be framed to get a certain answer. And like I said, the weird little ending there with the interview with Chris Christie, I don't know what that was about. It looked like Chris Wallace kind of lost it for a second there. But I only have one more clip I want to show on the Republican side before I get to the Democratic side, although the first clip from the Democratic side actually covers both again, kind of like that clip I showed from Jonathan Karl at the beginning here that talked about the tale of two frontrunners and had the Dickensian motif to it. I'm going to have another clip like that, a little bit like that from CNN State of the Union, talking about the polls on both sides. And some of the clips I've shown already allude to those polls that have Donald Trump at I think it's 23% in Iowa, and then Dr. Ben Carson is in second place at 18%. Ted Cruz is in third, though he's in single digits, and everyone else is in single digits, including Scott Walker and Jeb Bush. This is in Iowa. This is a recent Bloomberg poll, and I want to show one of a couple clips I'm going to show you from CBS's Face the Nation, where they had on Ann Seltzer from the group that actually did the poll, talking about the internals. I'm going to have another clip of her later talking about the internals on the Democratic side, which is not just how well everyone did, like the 23%, 18% I was talking about, but their favorability versus unfavorability, and why people like them. And here she is talking about the internals on the Republican side before I go to the Democratic side over in this clip.
Trump at 23. Ben Carson at 18, Scott Walker and Ted Cruz at 8, and Rubio and Bush at 6. So Trump is on top. He's been that at other places. But what struck me was his numbers on the favorability rating.
Yes, a few months ago, he had the highest unfavorables of anybody. Sort of Chris Christie was in that league with him, and people said, "Well, he can't possibly do any better in the horse race because his unfavorables are so high. Can you really ever turn those around?" And I said, "You know, we've seen everything happen, and we certainly saw it happen this time." He now has 7 people with higher unfavorables than he has, and that includes Jeb Bush. So he has grown his favorability, and it's turned into votes.
Yeah, I mean, he was toxic before, my word, and now Republicans have warmed to him. Now, Ben Carson, you couldn't think of a candidate who's any more different than Donald Trump, right? Self-effacing, quiet, but he's coming up strong in Iowa. Is he sort of the slow and steady kind of Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee candidate that we've seen in previous races?
I think he sort of is the Huckabee version of that. But he also has made a real presence, kind of a quiet presence, I'll say. So nobody is really doing much on television, but he has billboards quite everywhere. So Ben Carson is in your community, really, on a pretty widespread basis. He was drawing last year. He was drawing packed crowds. So people know him. He has a book out that you trip over them because they're kind of everywhere. So there's a lot that people are finding that they like. Now, he's also not an establishment candidate. And if you take the numbers who support Trump, the numbers who support Carson, the numbers who support Carly Fiorina, that's 46% of the vote right now. You can add Ted Cruz if you want, you quibble with that. That puts it over 50%. That says something about the mood.
Yeah, and what is the mood, what does it say about Jeb Bush?
Jeb Bush's numbers don't look very good here. He's dropped in terms of support. His favorability numbers are not looking like, he's not making improvement in Iowa. And I think by the time we're heading into September, he's been at it for a while, you would be looking to be gaining some traction.
And then just quickly, Scott Walker, Iowa's supposed to be his state. What's happened to him?
Well, I think everything's been a little bit quieter since Donald Trump jumped in for everybody else, number one. But number two, I think he's just not out there in a big way, in a big presence. So his support has been cut in half.
Yeah, so that's how things are going in terms of the polls. The latest Bloomberg poll that was Ann Seltzer, and like I said, I'm going to show a clip from her near the end of the Democratic side that shows the internals on that. So that is the next topic I want to get to. That was a little bit more bearable on Donald Trump this week, I think, as I promised. Now I'm going to get over to the Democratic race, and first I'm going to show a report from CNN's State of the Union. This is Jake Tapper starting off saying that the State of the Union, you know, he's doing this little introduction saying, what is the State of the Union every week I've been showing. And this week it is burning up, you know, as in Feel the Burn, Bernie Sanders. And then he does a quick report that talks a little bit about the Republican polls, but also about how Bernie Sanders is now within 7 points of Hillary Clinton in Iowa. And Hillary Clinton, for the first time, is below 50% in Iowa, which you can see over in this clip.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is burning up. A brand new poll showing the insurgent in the Democratic race for president, Independent Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont, making serious gains on Hillary Clinton in Iowa. The Des Moines Register Bloomberg poll shows Clinton dropping below 50% for the first time this year, coming in at 37% to Sanders' 30%. And Sanders has swayed a third of Clinton supporters to come over to his side. The poll also looked at Republicans and found Donald Trump on top again with 23% of Iowans favoring him. Another outsider candidate, Dr. Ben Carson, number 2 with a bullet at 18%. Ted Cruz and Scott Walker coming in at 8% each, Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio at 6% each. It all adds up to a very interesting, unpredictable race with non-traditional, non-establishment candidates gaining steam and drawing crowds. So let's get...
Oh, and sorry, at the end there you see Jake Tapper say, so let's get right to it with his interview with Bernie Sanders. And I do have 4 substantial Bernie Sanders clips I'm going to get to in a moment, but first, I want to spend a few clips talking about Hillary Clinton and her ongoing email scandal. First, HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. This is from the monologue where Bill Maher talked about how he thinks it's pretty much a nothing burger, but that Fox News is doing a good job using it to bring down Hillary Clinton's numbers on being trustworthy. Is this from the monologue? Yeah. And he also talks about the cloud poll that you saw referenced in an earlier clip at the beginning of the show, where the Quinnipiac poll asked people to say the first word they thought of describing the candidate, and for Hillary Clinton, some of the top words were liar and untrustworthy. And anyway, Bill Maher talks about that over in this clip.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, I must say Hillary Clinton's email problems are only getting worse. Now, I happen to think this is the biggest nothing burger scandal, non-scandal ever. But you know what? I got to give it to the Fox News propaganda machine. They do know how to change opinion. The Quinnipiac poll came out. Listen to this. They asked voters the first word that came to their mind when they heard Hillary Clinton. Overwhelmingly, that word was liar. Second was dishonest. Third was untrustworthy. Other words that came up: crooked, criminal, deceitful, phony, bitch, murder. And then the pollster said, Mr. Biden, I really have to make some other
Well, I'm not really going to have much Biden coverage, although apparently Vice President Joe Biden is still thinking about entering the race, and one of the reasons he's thinking about doing it is because Hillary Clinton's numbers have gone down. But actually, the next clip I want to show is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where Martha Raddatz introduces a bunch of clips that they put together showing how Hillary Clinton has changed her tone from sort of a semi-defiant tone at the beginning on these emails to then joking and being sarcastic, and now she didn't quite apologize, but more lately she's been more contrite about the whole thing. And here's sort of a montage of Hillary Clinton's change in tone on the emails from ABC this morning in this clip.
Back now with Hillary Clinton and that email firestorm, the FBI investigation ongoing. She spoke about it again this week, and while Clinton has adjusted some of her wording about whether classified information was in her emails, perhaps more noticeable, some distinct changes in her tone since this story broke.
At that first press conference back in March, Clinton was resolute, defiant.
The laws and regulations in effect when I was Secretary of State allowed me to use my email for work. There is no classified materials.
By July, a slight change in response, but not the tone.
I am confident that I never sent nor received any information that was classified at the time it was sent and received.
Then she turned to humor.
You may have seen that I recently launched a Snapchat account. I love it. Those messages disappear all by themselves.
Then sarcasm.
Did you wipe the server? What, like with a cloth or something?
Now this week, a more contrite tone, but no apologies.
It clearly wasn't the best choice. I should have used two emails, one personal, one for work, and I take responsibility for that decision.
Minnesota.
So, like I said, that's the ABC report on the change in tone, and ABC also had on a Hillary Clinton surrogate. You know, Hillary Clinton hasn't gone on any of these Sunday news shows. She did one interview with CNN that was replayed on CNN State of the Union, but actually came earlier in the week. She hasn't made herself available like all these other candidates have, but she does send out surrogates every now and then. This week her surrogate was a Democratic Senator, Amy Klobuchar, and here you can see her talking to Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, talking about both her numbers on dishonesty and her change in tone on the emails in this clip.
That's not what happened. I think she approached this with a vigor from the beginning, having been through this before, that she was going to be scrappy, that she was going to be out there meeting people, talking to people in a grassroots way.
Okay,
that's
scrappy,
what she's doing, and
scrappy
really
is not one of the words that they describe her in the Quinnipiac poll. The language describing Hillary Clinton, let's go through this. Number one is liar, followed by dishonest, followed by untrustworthiness.
Well, as someone that has known her since I've been in the Senate, that's just not how I see her. And I think we have to step back a little. These debates are coming up. Americans are going to have this opportunity to see her in a debate format very soon.
But
They're
clearly,
going to have a
Senator
chance to see her
Klobuchar,
when
this
they
is
come to
clearly
their
about
states.
the emails in some ways. Somebody has to be, if they're saying liar, dishonest, untrustworthy, that takes you back to this issue of the emails that keeps dogging her. Should she apologize? Should she handle it differently?
Well, I really appreciated the tone she had when she was just down in Iowa. You played that, where she talked about how she took responsibility. I think that is the proper way to talk about it. There's a lot of partisan stuff going on that's not fair to her. But in this case, she had to take responsibility for what she did, and she did. She said she should have had 2 different email accounts, that she should have done this differently. And she also said, which I think is significant here, Martha, is that she is going to be testifying at a public hearing in October. Her arch enemies in the House of Representatives can ask what questions they want. And I think that will give the American people another opportunity to look at this. Because when I'm at the Minnesota State Fair, what people are talking about are their jobs. They're talking about, can they send their kids to college? They're talking about the work, when they ask me about her, the work that she's done on addiction.
Speaking of fairs and
Okay, well, that's as much time as I'm going to spend on the Hillary email scandal, or maybe it's not completely the nothing burger that Bill Maher said in his monologue, but I thought Amy Klobuchar did a better job of defending Hillary Clinton than that Claire McCaskill clip, Senator from Missouri Claire McCaskill, that I showed, was it last week before, and sometime in the last couple weeks, where I thought she raised issues that she didn't need to raise about Hillary Clinton's motives and didn't really answer them. While that was just more about how there's not much there, I guess, but at least based on the evidence currently available, there isn't much there. And not that the FBI investigation couldn't turn out more, but somehow I just don't see it, at least in terms of Hillary Clinton herself. But I do want to move on to the Bernie Sanders clips that I promised you all. The first 2 I'm going to show are also from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz, who, as you know if you watch my show on a regular basis, has very close ties to the Defense Department and the military, and she gets really good embedded reports from a lot of places that the military helps her go on, with military units, and I think she is a good reporter and asks good questions even when she's with the military, but I think her foreign policy views, being a little bit hawkish maybe, seem to come out in her questioning of Bernie Sanders about his foreign policy views and whether he'd be tough enough to be commander-in-chief and whether he'd scare our adversaries. And the first question, I actually split it into 2 parts. The first question she asks him is about why his website doesn't even have a section on foreign policy, which he admits is a problem. And then she asks him, the circumstances as commander-in-chief when he thinks force is necessary, and Bernie Sanders admits that's a good question. And I think he gives a pretty good answer that I'm going to break it about a little under 4 minutes and then give a little more commentary before I show the end of that questioning. This is the first part of Martha Raddatz's questioning in this clip.
This morning again, we know you've been voicing great concern about the middle class, the cost of college, climate change, and yet there are 2 issues that are entirely missing from your campaign website, and those are issues of national security and foreign policy. Don't you feel these are issues that a president should be very concerned about?
Absolutely, Martha, and we will, in all fairness, we've only been in this race for 3.5 months. And we have been focusing quite correctly, as you've indicated, on the economy, on the collapse of the American middle class, on massive income and wealth inequality. But you're absolutely right. Foreign policy is a huge issue. Let me just say a word or 2 about that. And we are going to spend more time on that. You are looking at a senator and a former congressman. And as a congressman, I voted against the war in Iraq, which I think will go down in history as one of the worst foreign policy blunders that we have ever seen, leading to the enormous destabilization of that region right now. But the issue of foreign policy, how we bring the world together, our allies together, not do it alone, to take on ISIS, to deal with the other threats and problems around the world.
Senator Sanders, you brought up the Iraq War.
You will address it.
You also voted against the first Gulf War in 1991 when Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. You did not support air attacks after chemical attacks in Syria. You did support the initial invasion into Afghanistan. So can you tell me what your criteria is for the use of force?
Yes, good question, a fair question. Look, I think historically, in too many instances, the United States has gone to war often unilaterally when we should not have. I think my vote against the first war in the Gulf region was the right vote. I think we could have gotten Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait in a way that did not require a war. And I think certainly my vote against the war in Iraq will go down.
Even though he had invaded Kuwait?
I know, but the point was you had the whole world united against him, Martha. Do we need to go to war in every instance, or can we bring pressure of sanctions and international pressure to resolve these conflicts? Look, I am supporting President Obama's effort to make certain that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. But I get very nervous about my Republican friends who keep implying that the only way we could do that is through another war. War is the last resort, not the first resort. So you are looking at a guy. Yeah, there are times when you have to use force. No question about it. But
And is that only when we're attacked? Is that only when we're attacked? Because if you look at your record, you supported the invasion into Afghanistan after we were attacked. Is that the only time you would support it?
No, not at all. Not at all. You know, I think using our military is an option, obviously, that we will always have under certain circumstances. But it is the last option. And I applaud the president for trying to make certain that we stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, but we do it in a way that does not require war. The second point that I would make is the United States cannot do it alone. In the Middle East, Saudi Arabia has the third largest military budget in the entire world. They're going to have to get in and take on ISIS, as well as other countries in that region. The United States should be supportive. We should be working with other countries. But the United States cannot always be the only country involved in these wars.
Let me go back to the...
I think that was generally a good answer I agree with more than certainly Hillary Clinton's more hawkish positions. That's one of the two areas I have of concern with Hillary Clinton being the coronated frontrunner of the Democrats. That's why I am glad to see Bernie Sanders doing as well as he's doing and bringing some of these issues up. One of the two issues I have is that Hillary Clinton is hawkish, too far to the right, voted for the Iraq War, and you heard Bernie Sanders talk about that in that answer. I thought Bernie Sanders actually talked a little bit tougher in the next part of his answer to Martha Raddatz on foreign policy, both about how the head of Russia and the head of Iran should fear that Bernie Sanders might use force because he says he might use force, and then also when Martha Raddatz brings up the possibility of President Bernie Sanders getting rid of the drone program. He doesn't say he's going to get rid of the drone program, even though he's been a critic of it. He just says he wants, more selective use of drones, which is more hawkish than I expected from Bernie Sanders. It seems like he may be trying to make himself a little more acceptable to the to Middle America with the second part of the answer over here.
In these wars.
Let me go back to the Iran agreement that you brought up and your support of that agreement. Can you imagine Iran or Russia signing some sort of agreement in the future, given your record on your reluctance to use force? Because there is always that threat of force, but they may look at you and say, Bernie Sanders wouldn't do anything about this.
Well, I think they would be making a very, very big mistake. I believe that the United States should have the strongest military in the world. We should be working with other countries in coalition. And when people threaten the United States or threaten our allies or commit genocide, the United States with other countries should be prepared to act militarily. But I think when we look at our recent history, again, especially the war in Iraq, I think history will record that is a terrible mistake, which has led to massive destabilization and many other problems. So, yes, there are times when you have to use military force. No question about it. I am prepared to do that.
Would you do away with the drone program? Would you do away with the drone program? Because you have clearly had problems with that. You didn't vote for CIA Director John Brennan because of the drone program and how it was run.
I think Martha, what you can argue is that there are times and places where drone attacks have been effective. There are times and places where they have been absolutely counter-effective and have caused more problems than they have solved. When you kill innocent people, what the end result is that people in the region become anti-American who otherwise would not have been. So I think we have to use drones very, very selectively and effectively. That has not always been the case.
Okay.
So, like I said, I thought that was a little more hawkish than I expected from Bernie Sanders, though he said a lot of really good things there, especially about the blowback from these drone strikes where every time there's collateral damage, we are recruiting more terrorists than we may be killing, or that's actually something that some studies have shown. So it's good to see some candidate talking about that on the Democratic side. I'm not sure if I would hear that from Hillary Clinton. Now I want to move over to a couple clips from Bernie Sanders' interview with Jake Tapper over on CNN State of the Union. This is more having to do with domestic issues. And the first clip I want to show, Bernie Sanders is responding to a question from Jake Tapper where I think he kind of found a way to get him to show his differences with Hillary Clinton without going negative. You know, Bernie Sanders always says he won't go negative, but he asked him about the problems with Wall Street. And, you know, I said there are two issues that I have concerns about Hillary Clinton. One is that she's too hawkish on foreign policy. The other is that she's too close to Wall Street. And you can see how Bernie Sanders, without really going negative, contrasts his policy positions to those of Hillary Clinton in a way that shows how she may be more beholden to Wall Street over in this clip.
You also talk about taking on the billionaire class, and you've said that Hillary Clinton, you're not sure whether or not she will take on the billionaire class. Give us some specifics where you think you would and she might not.
I think that the business model of Wall Street is fraud. And I think these guys drove us into the worst economic downturn in the modern history of America. I think they're at it again. I believe that when you have so few banks with so much power, you have to not only reestablish Glass-Steagall, but you got to break them up. That is not Hillary Clinton's position. I believe that our trade policies, NAFTA, CAFTA, PNTR with China, have been a disaster. I am helping to lead the effort against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That is not Hillary Clinton's position. I believe, along with Pope Francis and almost all scientists, that climate change is threatening this planet in horrendous ways, and that we have to be aggressive in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel and defeat the Keystone Pipeline. That is not Hillary Clinton's position. I believe that, as opposed to my Republican colleagues who want to cut Social Security, I believe we should expand Social Security by lifting the cap on taxable income. That's not Hillary Clinton's position. I believe that we've got to raise the minimum wage over a period of several years to $15 an hour, not Hillary Clinton's position. I voted against the war in Iraq. Hillary Clinton voted for it.
So he slipped in the Iraq war at the end there, but mostly it was talking about Wall Street. And I don't think you'll hear Hillary Clinton say that the business model on Wall Street is fraud. That I think might upset some of the people at Goldman Sachs and others who are supporting her campaign and breaking up the big banks, the Keystone Pipeline, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. All those issues that Bernie Sanders mentioned are all issues where Hillary Clinton is too close to Wall Street, and hopefully through debates and through candidacies like Bernie Sanders, she'll move to the left or she'll get left behind. Move to the left or get left behind. That's my motto for Hillary Clinton, and how she should react to Bernie Sanders, or who knows, she just may not be the right candidate for that message. Maybe Bernie Sanders could be president. stranger things have happened, I guess. But I want to show one more clip of Bernie Sanders before I move on. This is the second clip of his CNN interview with Jake Tapper on State of the Union. In this clip, he responds to a question about gun control. You know, there was a shooting that I'm going to cover with, I think, 4 clips a little later after I finish up the Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, etc., Democratic race. But this is Jake Tapper asking about how a Hillary Clinton surrogate is actually going after Bernie Sanders on his pro-gun voting record. I covered that in a clip a few weeks back because it's been a issue that's come up and again where someone's tried to show that Bernie Sanders is actually pro-gun or pro-Second Amendment or not sufficiently pro-gun control. And this is how he answers that charge on CNN State of the Union this morning here.
News story took place in Roanoke, Virginia, Wednesday morning with the shooting of those 2 individuals with the local news station. Your Democratic rivals have been arguing that when it comes to guns, you are out of step with liberal and progressive primary voters on the issue of gun control. A surrogate for Hillary Clinton, Connecticut Governor Dan Malloy, he went to New Hampshire and said that your gun votes have been driven by, quote, political expediency, and that this is a dividing line between you and Hillary Clinton. Your response?
Well, let me tell you, I have, as I understand it, a lifetime voting record from the NRA of D-. I voted very strongly for instant background checks. I want to see them made stronger. Probably the most important thing that we can do. Number 2, I voted in a state, by the way, Jake, which has almost no gun control, not an easy vote. I voted against the NRA, and I voted to ban certain types of semi-automatic weapons. I voted to eliminate this gun show loophole, which allows people to purchase guns without a background check. And by the way, in addition to that, what I believe is we need to do a lot better job in terms of mental health in this country. People call my office, they call offices all over this country and saying, you know, my brother, my husband, I'm really worried about what he might do to himself or other people. We do not have the capability of treating those folks. When people have mental health issues, when they're a threat to others or themselves, they should be able to get counseling immediately. That is not the case right now. So I do not accept the fact that I have been weak on this issue. In fact, I've been strong on this issue. And in fact, coming from a rural state which has almost no gun control, I think I can get beyond the noise and all of these arguments and people shouting at each other and come up with real constructive gun control legislation, which most significantly gets guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't.
Who shouldn't have them. I think I cut it off like a second too early there, but I thought that was a pretty strong answer from Senator Bernie Sanders, saying that even though he's had some votes that you might expect from a rural senator, and the one that wasn't brought up there was the liability of gun manufacturers that I talked about, and I criticized him slightly on and got some negative feedback from Bernie Sanders supporters a few weeks back, but I thought that was a much stronger answer, even though it didn't really deal with the gun manufacturer liability question. And so I wanted to show that as one of my 4 Bernie Sanders clips. I have just a couple more clips on the Democratic race before I get to the actual issue of guns and the shooting in Roanoke, Virginia, these 2 local news journalists. But before I do that, I want to show an analysis of Bernie Sanders' chances from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. This is actually from the Overtime segment, which is live on YouTube at the end of the show and then becomes a recorded show. I put a link down to the entire, I think it's 12 minutes and 12 seconds or something like that. I'm just showing like the last 3.5 minutes of the Overtime where they talk about whether Bernie Sanders as a socialist can be elected president in the United States. And Rick Santorum first brings up that clip I played a couple weeks back of the head of the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, being unable or unwilling to answer the question about what's the difference between socialism and the Democrats. And, you know, I have some pretty simple views on the definition of socialism based on taking political science courses and reading the dictionary or whatever. But I'll discuss that after. They never really define socialism, but then they talk about it for about 3.5 minutes at the end of Real Time with Bill Maher's Overtime from last Friday in this clip.
Let me ask this about Bernie Sanders. I mean, he has huge crowds, huge crowds. The media doesn't cover that nearly the way they do Donald Trump. Also, I noticed all Republicans are able to dismiss Bernie Sanders with one word: socialist. Like, case closed. I don't have to argue anymore. He's a socialist. Social security is socialism, but would you campaign against that?
Well, what I think Chris Matthews' question to Debbie Wasserman Schultz was really the operative question. What's the difference between a socialist and a Democrat? And to this date, my understanding is she has not answered, even though she's been asked multiple times. And the truth is that the Democratic Party is basically a socialist party these days.
Wait a second.
To the left.
America and every modern...
You tell me the difference. What's the difference between a Democrat and a socialist?
Well, I wish the Democrats were socialists.
Okay. Tell me how they're not.
Okay, I will.
Tell me how they're not.
Okay, but every modern country is a quasi-socialist country, including the United States. And again, you would not vote to repeal Social Security, would you? And if you wouldn't, then you are also quasi-socialist.
No, just because their programs...
Or the Veterans Administration.
Just because the government does certain functions that we believe should be socialized doesn't mean that we're a socialist. I mean, socialist...
That's exactly what it means.
No, it doesn't.
What's the difference?
For example, the fact that we provide for a common defense and that we fund the defense branch, does that make us a socialist? Because the government is doing that? Of course not.
Of course the military...
when it becomes socialism, and the Republicans haven't reached that level. But to the degree that we support social...
You know what's real socialism is the fact that every year the Pentagon tells Congress not to build weapons. They say, we don't need them, we can't use them, we literally have no place to put them. And Congress still makes them because it's a jobs program in their district. That's socialism.
I agree with that.
But that's the good kind of socialism because we're building weapons.
It's like corporate welfare.
Yeah.
It's different standards that apply to corporations rather than
anytime
people.
you buy a weapon system that you don't absolutely need for the defense, you're doing a disservice to the people. By the way, Bernie Sanders, we worked with Bernie. We did. He's a nice guy.
He's more than a nice guy.
Right.
He's a serious contender for the Democratic nomination.
Yeah,
this guy is running a real campaign.
Yes, he is.
He's connected. I have almost every college student I encounter is for Sanders. It's unbelievable.
Well, let me ask you. What are the policy differences between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders?
It's about tone.
What is the policy difference between Hillary Clinton? Name one difference between Hillary Clinton.
That's one great thing about Bernie Sanders. He's forced her to move to the left.
One thing he's really pushing for is single-payer health care system. He's talking about
which Hillary
that.
supported in that.
But you know what? I think that he has helped make the Democratic candidates altogether a better group because he is speaking to something that is really in people's hearts and minds in this country.
Right.
They are so frustrated with income inequality. They are so frustrated with wage stagnation. They're so frustrated.
You should listen to my
with
speeches.
Loans
because I talk
that
about
they
the
can't
same
afford
thing.
to pay. Yeah, but you probably aren't advocating for an increase.
We have a
in
different
minimum wage,
solution.
are you?
Actually, it's the sincerity factor, too. People actually believe Bernie Sanders will put a lot of these Wall Street crooks in prison. They don't believe it when Hillary Clinton says it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's not just people believing Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders on putting Wall Street crooks in prison. As I showed in that previous clip from Bernie Sanders, he said the business model on Wall Street is fraud, and he actually named several policies that are different from Hillary Clinton's policies on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Keystone Pipeline, on breaking up the big banks and Glass-Steagall, and several other issues. You watched the clip with me, so you know what they were. Before I move on to the gun issue and the shooting that took place, I want to show one more clip on the Democratic side, as I promised at the end of the Republican topic, where I showed Ann Seltzer on CBS's Face the Nation talk about the internals of the new Bloomberg poll on the Republican side. Here's a clip of her talking about the internals on the Democratic side, which talks about I think she talks about the really strong enthusiasm, especially amongst younger voters for Bernie Sanders, but but also how the Bernie Sanders vote is not an anti-Hillary Clinton vote, which is good news for Hillary if she ends up being the nominee of the Democratic Party. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more. Before I get to that clip, though, I did promise to say something about socialism, which, if you look it up in the dictionary, means government or collective or group ownership of the means of production. So Social Security is not socialism. Even single-payer healthcare is not socialism unless the government owns the hospitals and employs the doctors. None of the stuff they were talking about is socialism. Now, democratic socialism, some people refer to that as being for a social safety net, or where there's some greater taxes on the rich and some redistribution through social programs and even through direct subsidy like the earned income tax credit to the working poor or the poor, and or through Medicaid, that's like health care for the poor. That is a social safety net, but it's not socialism unless there's actual ownership of the means of production by the government or collective or group ownership. That's not classical socialism, and I don't know why nobody in that last discussion understood that. But so I wanted to make sure I said that before I move on to this next clip, which is, like I said, the internals of the new Bloomberg poll that shows enthusiasm of young people for Bernie Sanders, but that the Bernie Sanders enthusiasm doesn't necessarily rule out Hillary Clinton as the eventual nominee in this clip.
Hillary Clinton is at 37, Bernie Sanders is at 30, and Joe Biden is at 14. What did you see in those numbers?
Well, I think the first thing that jumps right off the page is this is the first time in Iowa that we've seen Hillary Clinton below 50%. And she's not just a little below 50%. She's lost a third of her support since June.
And is that a move away from Hillary Clinton or a move to Bernie Sanders? What's happening to her support?
Well, her support is going a little bit into the not sure category, with people sort of being waiting there. But the Bernie Sanders vote is certainly getting stronger. And I think important to point out, it isn't just that there's an anti-Clinton sentiment. It isn't that. So that's perhaps the good news for former Secretary of State Clinton. That is, when we ask Bernie Sanders supporters, is this because you align with Bernie Sanders, the person and his views, 96% say yes. I mean, overwhelmingly, that's what they're up to. And Clinton's favorabilities are very strong. So she's in sort of a place of discomfort, where her first choice horse race, not so good.
So Sanders voters are feeling the burn. Who are they? I mean, who's turning out for Bernie Sanders?
And this, I think, also is fascinating, is that you look into the internals, as we call them. Who is it that he is strong with? So he's losing by 7 points. He leads by 8 points with people who say this would be the first time they participated in the caucus. He leads by over 20 points with people who say they consider themselves independent and people who are under age 45. Now that's the Obama coalition. Those are the groups he put together that surprised Hillary Clinton in 2008.
Now, that's the Obama coalition from Iowa that surprised Hillary Clinton in 2008. But it's not the entire Obama coalition, because Bernie Sanders does not do as well with the working class and minority voters that, I don't know, President Obama did have some problem with the working class voters, but he definitely did much better with minority voters than Bernie Sanders is doing if he wants to overcome Hillary Clinton in the way that Barack Obama did in 2008. Anyway, that's the last clip I want to show on the 2016 presidential race, the Republican side, the Democratic side. You can let me know what you think about all those clips. I do have 4 clips on the shooting of those TV journalists, followed by 3 clips on ISIS and the threat from ISIS, and then recruiting of Muslims in the Western world that I think is a little bit Islamophobic in the last one of the last clips. No, it's the final clip from Bill Maher, HBO's Real Time, so you can stay tuned for that. But first I want to show a clip having to do with this shooting of these 2 TV journalists that I didn't see it live, but I saw it breaking, and I ended up watching both the video from the TV station, which was brutal enough. And I ended up also watching some of the video that the shooter himself recorded. I kind of turned away when the actual shooting started because I couldn't watch that, but I watched it with my wife, and she watched the whole thing and said I didn't miss that much. But that was really disconcerting. That really had an emotional impact on me, and even though, you know, it's no more brutal than any of the many shootings that take place, seeing it happen live on video for some reason did make it more impactful. And the first clip I want to show is a brief update from Jake Tapper on some new things that have been learned about the shooting, and then he uses that as an introduction to the father of one of the victims, Andy Parker, the father of Alison Parker, the on-air journalist who was killed in this shooting. And he's been kind of outspoken, saying he wants to get the gun laws changed. And it seems like he actually takes a swipe at Fox News at the beginning of his answer. He doesn't say Fox News. He says the networks that you can guess who it is. I'm not going to name them, but who else could it be? You can tell me what you think after you see that clip over here.
Investigators continuing to discover new details in that horrifying murder of a Virginia news crew. Police now saying the gunman, a former colleague of the victims, Alison Parker and Adam Ward, expressed admiration for other horrific attacks, such as 9/11. Parker's family has created a scholarship in her memory, but her father says her real memorial will be a living one. He's vowing to fight to create new legislation in her name to curb gun violence. He joins me now from his home in Collinsville, Virginia. Mr. Parker, first of all, my deepest condolences. I know I speak for everyone when we say we can't even imagine what you're going through. So many people across the nation have been moved by what happened to your daughter and Adam Ward. What would you like them to do in her name, in her memory?
Well, Jake, thanks for having me on. And before we get to that, to the answer to that question, I just want to tell you that everyone, I've done a lot of media interviews, as you probably know, and a lot with CNN, and with the exception of one news organization that you can probably figure out that will go unnamed, everyone has been so kind and considerate of our family and the line of questioning. And I want to give a particular shout out to Jennifer Henderson, who's one of your producers, who's been like a member of the family to us, and we so appreciate that. What I would like for everyone to know and to keep in mind is, you know, this is, just don't be desensitized to this issue, and don't go, oh gee, this is another horrific incident. What's for dinner tonight, honey? And I think that's my fear, is that you know, this is going to be a big news story for a weekend, and then, you know, it's on to the next one. But you know, we cannot let this drop. And I think this is different. This time this is different, and because Alison was one of you guys. I mean, she was part of the media, and it could have been, you know, it could have been anyone out there doing this. So I think that you know, I just want people to know that I'm going to be working on this for a long time. I know that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, but you know, I'm going to affect a change. I think Chris Hurst, her boyfriend, and I are, because of our backgrounds, are uniquely qualified to galvanize all the different groups that are trying to put this thing together and make a difference, and to speak as one voice and hold the politicians' feet to the fire. I was, you know, listening to Bernie Sanders as we were, you know, in the lead up to this, and I liked what he said. You know, I think he said regarding another matter, you know, same old isn't going to work, and it's this. It applies to this issue, and I think the reason he's doing so well, and the reason that Donald Trump is doing so well in the polls, is that there's an anger in this country, you know, that same old isn't going to work. Right. But the difference is this time, you know, it's got to apply to sensible gun control legislation, controlling the loopholes in gun shows, right, and you know, doing those kinds of things.
So that guy was pretty articulate for a guy whose daughter was killed earlier this week. If my daughter was killed earlier this week, I don't think I'd be doing the show, and I don't think I'd be on the news if I were in that guy's position. I don't even want to think about that. And I'm actually going to show a clip where he was even more persuasive, because in that clip, the sad part about what he said there is that he was worried it was just going to be a story for the weekend and then people would move on to the next story. Well, it wasn't even that big a story this weekend on the Sunday morning news analysis programs. He was on State of the Union. They only discussed it on Fox News Sunday in kind of a weird way during the panel. And let's see, on Face the Nation, there was like a little memorial at the end. But it was like not discussed very much on any of the programs. But I'm going to show a clip in just a couple minutes that I caught on CNN's, what is it called, Newsroom with Poppy Harlow, which is just one of their regular live news programs, where she interviewed not just Andy Parker, but for the first time the mother of Alison Parker, Barbara Parker. And in that interview, I actually got a little choked up watching, and he made CNN anchor Poppy Harlow actually cry during his answer. But before I get to that, I want to show something that was kind of bizarre, which was the way Fox News treated this. You saw kind of a little swipe at Fox News, I think, in that answer from Andy Parker. And Fox News didn't cover it with any news coverage, but first they said it was an issue of guns and race and social media was the way you can see Chris Wallace frame it in the teaser for their panel discussion about it over in this clip.
Coming up, the murder of 2 journalists on live TV. Our Sunday panel returns to discuss guns, race, and social media. Plus, what would you like to ask the panel about this latest tragedy? Just go to Facebook or Twitter at Fox News Sunday, and we may use your question.
So I wasn't sure what they meant by race, and I watched the whole panel discussion, and there was only really one mention of race in the panel discussion, and it came from George Will, conservative columnist George Will, who used to be a regular over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, but has now moved over to the dark side on Fox News. And this is a pretty dark answer from, first you'll see the introduction from Chris Wallace sort of describing what happened, and then George Will seems to kind of blame it on the fact that he was a gay African American who bought into the grievance culture, I think is what he says, and that's kind of gross over in this clip.
We want to pause and reflect, and we want to share with you once again what made these 2 so special, not just to us, but to all of our hometowns that WDBJ7 serves. Please join us now in a moment of silence.
Colleagues of the 2 journalists gunned down on live television remember reporter Alison Parker and cameraman Adam Ward, and we're back now with the panel. George, we had a perfect storm this week with a gunman, Vester Flanagan, shooting the reporter and cameraman on live television and then putting out his own video of the murder on Facebook and Twitter. What are your thoughts about the way this was carried out?
Well, when these horrific events occur, there's an irresistible itch to commit sociology, to find some explanation, causal link, and some social prompting. This gentleman, this man, was a gay African American who nevertheless was hired in spite of what he took to be insuperable handicaps. And he does seem to have bought into the grievance culture of our time, feeling prickly and set upon at all times by all people. That said, it seems to me we all should step back before explaining these in terms of some defect in the society or some new social media culture, because what that commits us to is the belief that every evil in the world can be changed by fiddling with the society, by rearranging it, by some law or regulation or something else. There are times when you just have to throw up your hands and say there's evil in the world, always has been, always will be.
Well, if
so there's nothing we can do but throw up our hands and say there's evil in the world, and Specifically, one of the things that is evil is the grievance culture of African American gay people who think they're owed something. Is that what George Will was saying there? I'm pretty sure that is what he was saying. And if you followed this story at all, what was driving the shooter in this case seemed more like mental illness than a grievance culture. But anyway, I thought that was kind of gross coverage on the part of Fox News. Maybe that has something to do with why the father of one of the victims, Andy Parker, made that swipe at Fox News, I think, in the previous clip I showed. But as promised, I'm going to show one more clip of the parents of the victim, Alison Parker. This is Andy and Barbara Parker talking to CNN's Poppy Harlow, and she asked them a question about, plays them a quote from one of the parents of the victims from Sandy Hook. You know, because some people say if Sandy Hook was the place where all those like kindergartners and first graders were killed by some random, young, was he like teenager or in his 20s who had a gun, not all that dissimilar from, I don't know how old the shooter was in this case. I think he was somewhat older, but all of these people were in their 20s, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, so here's the interview on CNN's, I think it's called CNN Newsroom with Poppy Harlow, where both the mother and the father, this is the first time I've seen the mother, and both the mother and the father are being interviewed, and the father, Andy Parker, actually gets the CNN anchor to cry, and I actually got a little choked up the first time I saw this. You can let me know what you think after you watch it here.
To read for you part of a letter from one mother to another this morning. Nicole Hockley, who lost her beautiful 6-year-old son Dylan in the Sandy Hook shooting, wrote an open letter this morning in the paper, and it reads, I understand the overwhelming need to make something positive come from this, the need to save lives as part of your daughter Alison's legacy. I can see the shock in your eyes and the potent mixture of anger and grief bubbling under the surface, threatening to overcome you at any time. I have insight into the journey ahead for you and can sadly say that it will never get easier. But there is hope, and that is what you need to hold on to. People say, if Sandy Hook couldn't deliver change, nothing will. I disagree. What do you say, Barbara?
I absolutely agree with that. You think that how could that many children be killed and nothing happen, for it to be ignored? But what we have to do is, there are people out there whose minds we will never change. They are the people that are unimportant in this fight. The people who are important to this fight are the silent majority who feel the way we do, that some kind of gun control measures are necessary.
Even the NRA, the majority of NRA membership supports, reasonable, closing of loopholes and making it harder for, for mentally disturbed people to get guns. And as Mark Kelly, mentioned, and I know this, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. But I'm in it for the long haul. We're in it for the long haul. I look at you and I see Alison. I mean, she was like a little sister. You could have been sisters. And, I think why this is different this time is that, that could have been you out there. And that's what I challenge the journalists. And I think that's why it's different. You guys are going to stay with us because she was one of you. She was one of the fraternity. And, that's why this thing is not going to go away, and that's why it's not going to be different, because she was one of you. And Poppy, it could have been you. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want another tragedy like this to happen.
It's horrible to think that journalists have to go through the rest of their lives looking over their shoulder or wondering, is there somebody out there that's going to come after me? And that shouldn't happen to anybody. To live your life in fear is not living.
No.
And no one should have to do that.
Well, It's hard not to get choked up with a lot of this coverage, but you don't often see the anchor get choked up that way and actually brought to tears. And, maybe the message that the father of Alison Parker, Andy Parker there, was making will have resonance over time because, like he pointed out, the victims were journalists, and there have been many cases where when journalists are the victims, journalists are more apt to pay attention and cover it, and you saw sort of almost like a not so subtle fear argument from both the parents there, talking about how journalists shouldn't have to live in fear and look over their shoulder, and maybe that will convince journalists like Poppy Harlow or journalists who aren't on Fox News. Though I saw actually a fairly good interview that Megyn Kelly of all people did on the Kelly File the same day of the shooting. I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly, it was either the day of or the next day, which again shows that this guy Andy Parker, he's doing something. I don't know if I could even speak at the funeral of my daughter within days of her death. I don't know where this guy is getting that media presence that most people never have. How you can have it when your daughter's been killed. I just don't get that part. But anyway, you can let me know what you think about that whole issue. I don't know if you got choked up watching that last clip, but I want to end with a few clips on the issue of ISIS and the Islamic State. And first, there were a couple clips over on NBC's Meet the Press. First, their reporter Richard Engel did this is about 3 minutes long, a report introduced by Chuck Todd on just about the 1 year anniversary of when President Obama said that he was coming up with a new strategy to fight ISIS, and how it's not really working beyond some of the airstrikes, but ISIS is moving all around the Middle East and is doing really well using social media to recruit people to be radicalized over in this clip.
1 year anniversary of trying to take on ISIS, and we're reminded all the time of the brutality of ISIS. In fact, this week, the group released footage purporting to show the destruction of the ancient city of Palmyra in Syria. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis is now reaching Europe as thousands of refugees flee the conflicts in the Middle East, with over 70 that suffocated in a truck in Austria and at least 150 drowning off the coast of Libya. Here in Washington, there's a growing realization that the current strategy to defeat ISIS is simply not working. Here's our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, with more.
The only part of the U.S. strategy against ISIS that's on target so far is the U.S. airstrikes. Last September, the administration announced the start of a war on ISIS.
To degrade and ultimately destroy the terrorist group known as ISIL.
Then, about 2 weeks ago, Washington got what sounded like some long-awaited good news. The U.S. has been bombing ISIS for nearly a year and finally got access to bases here in southern Turkey, bringing jets and drones far closer to their targets, a huge tactical gain. But ISIS doesn't seem to be shrinking. In fact, to quote one U.S. official, ISIS's international branches are growing like crazy. ISIS has spread rapidly across North and West Africa, Arabia, Afghanistan, even into the Far East. ISIS has expanded far more quickly and extensively than al-Qaeda ever did.
What's happening mostly is the brand of ISIS is as powerful as the brand of Osama bin Laden. The ISIS battle is not going to be a quick battle. It takes years.
And even at home in ISIS strongholds in Iraq and Syria, the group continues to operate openly, ruling by fear. Abu Muthanna was a mid-level ISIS commander who ran a village near Raqqa in Syria, like a mayor. I was responsible for everything, he says, the security of the town, its food, water, electricity, the fighters. I was the chairman of the police station. But Abu Muthanna eventually became disillusioned. ISIS, he says, is corrupt and kills too many Muslims. I started doubting the Islamic State when they began to fight with other Islamic groups, he says. So why isn't the U.S. strategy working? It's based on 3 pillars, and they're all shaky. Retraining the Iraqi army. It's been slow, and Iran often calls the shots. Training Syrian rebels, but so far only a handful are ready to fight, and many of them have already been kidnapped. And finally, the airstrikes, which are killing ISIS fighters and leaders, but who are then replaced.
The problem with airstrikes is it gives you a sense that you've done more than you've done. It's very hard to have desired political effects from the air, as we saw in U.S. operations in Libya.
And so, NBC News has learned the U.S. military, led by Special Operations, is now in the midst of a major policy review to come up with a new global strategy to deal with what is now global ISIS. For Meet the Press, Richard Engel.
So that was big news from Richard Engel there, that the Obama administration is reevaluating their strategy and is going to come up with this new ways to fight ISIS, except the next guest who was on Meet the Press was the Obama administration's ambassador to the anti-ISIS coalition. His name is Brett McGurk, and he actually started off by denying what was in that report, saying that no, it's not true, that they're not reevaluating their policies. This is all going according to plan. It's just a very slow plan over in this clip.
Let me ask you, based on Richard's reporting right now, this new policy review, what more can you tell us about it? And how soon will we see a new strategy?
Well, we're not in the midst of a policy review. We're implementing the policy that we put together about a year ago. But I think it's very important, Chuck, to step back. It was about a year ago at this point, we didn't even have an Iraqi government in place. We didn't have a coalition in place. And when President Obama spoke to the American people on September 10th, he said there's going to be a multi-year campaign. And that was based on our assessment of ISIL for what it is. It's better in every respect than Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which we fought, best military in the world, and it took years to defeat and to degrade that enemy. We said there's going to be a multi-year campaign. We're about a year into it. The objective in this first year is to degrade its capabilities, to remove its leaders, to degrade its ability to mass and maneuver force around the battlefield, and that's what we're doing right now.
Okay, but a year later, can you say that ISIS is weaker today than it was a year ago? It doesn't sound like it is.
Again, degrading its overall capabilities. That's the objective over the first year. And if you take this from Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIL's perspective, a year ago he was out in the open. He was speaking to his cohorts in the openly. He was expanding the caliphate. Right now, his caliphate in Iraq and Syria is shrinking. He just lost last week his #1 deputy, a gentleman, a terrorist he goes by the name of Haji Mutaz. He's the #1 leader of ISIL in Iraq. He was killed just last week. We also killed, just in the heart of Raqqa, of ISIL's capital, a computer technician who was trying to inspire attacks here in the U.S. But don't get me wrong, Chuck, this is going to be a very long-term, multi-year campaign. I was here about 2 months ago, and at that time, ISIL was controlling almost the entire border with Syria. Since that time, the entire border from the Euphrates east, we have taken away from ISIL, and now we're working with Turkey and some other groups to take away the last 60-mile stretch of the border that it's now controlling.
All right, you're saying all these.
So those are kind of the dueling NBC Meet the Press clips on the fight against ISIS. First, the reporting from Richard Engel that things aren't really going that well, and then the response of the Obama administration representative Brett McGurk there saying, no, things are going according to plan. It's just a very slow plan. And that was mostly about the fight in Iraq and Syria, though he talked a little bit about the recruiting all around the world, and especially in the West. And that was the subject of a discussion over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where Bill Maher, like I said at the beginning, said something I thought was a little borderline Islamophobic, where he talked about how the Muslims in the Western world who we know, even though they seem normal, they really hate us and they could go berserk at any time, is kind of what he's saying, I think. He says he doesn't say all Muslims, but he says Muslims in a way that I wish he were a little more clear that we're talking about a very small minority of Muslims, kind of similar to the small minority of a lot of groups that go berserk and violent, as we've seen in so many of these violent episodes. It's not just Muslims who go berserk and hurt people in the United States using guns or other violent means. And anyway, I promised you something I thought was borderline Islamophobic. I'm going to show you the clip, and I'll talk about it just a little more, and you can let me know what you think down in the comment section after you watch it here.
Now, the people, when they caught that couple in Mississippi, everybody around them said, I can't believe it. They seem like such nice people. They didn't betray their ideas at all.
Right.
The Tsarnaev brothers, same thing. Most of the terrorists, this is the reaction. This is what is so scary to me, is that Muslims in our society, they live in the society, they seem to enjoy Western society, and there must be something in their brain that is saying, oh, but you really should feel kind of guilty about that.
Well,
we were talking before, but how do you know when the person is going to snap? How do you know? The Tsarnaev kid was popular. He was good looking. He had girlfriends. He had money.
And the most interesting thing is it's not people who come over from foreign countries, right? Their parents come over. They want to make a good living. They want to live the American dream or the British dream, if such a thing exists. And their children become radicalized and then set things off. So Jihadi John, Mohammed Emwazi, his dad was a black taxi driver in London, you know, middle class kind of background.
Sure.
How did this happen? He got a degree in engineering. You mentioned the underpants bomber, Abdul Muttalib.
Right.
His father was a minister in the Nigerian government who actually blew the whistle. He said, I think my son's becoming a terrorist. This guy actually was president of the Islamic Society at his university in London and putting out videos that were celebrating the 9/11 attacks and actually propagating the sermons of Anwar al-Awlaki, an al-Qaeda cleric. He may have actually gone to a mosque in London where al-Awlaki's sermons were being broadcast. So this is all happening. We all say, how did this happen? We didn't see it coming. Actually, we do see it coming in a lot of instances. You can tell when your children are kind of going down this wayward path. In a lot of cases, you know, everybody rebels when they're young, when they're an adolescent.
Right.
But if you start watching the YouTube videos, praising jihad, start making excuses for what ISIS is doing, the moral equivalency argument, these are all telltale signs, you know?
So I think what that CNN contributor, terrorism expert at the end was saying there is actually more accurate about the disillusionment of the youth and the rebellion of adolescence, how that is something that happens in a lot of places, in a lot of cultures, even more Western cultures and people who are middle class, but that for people who come from a Muslim background, that these jihadists and their use of social media can be kind of persuasive. But the part at the beginning, I think that's almost like the definition of Islamophobic. It's Bill Maher saying, you know, Muslims, you know, who seem normal and who you think are just members of society, you should be afraid of them because they might snap because they feel guilty about being in the West. And I don't think that there's enough of a basis to say something like that without pointing out that you're talking about a very small number of people. You know, like I said, I think the terrorism expert there, Michael Weiss, was more accurate when he was talking about how it's the disillusionment of youth and adolescents who, for people who come from an Islamic background, they're susceptible to that kind of recruiting. But you can see, you know, there have been people recruited into anarchism and anti-government stuff. You know, it's kind of like the Hacker Anonymous community in a way for a different segment of disillusioned youth. Those are the same people in a different way who are susceptible to being recruited by ISIS, I think. But I don't know. You can let me know what you think about that analysis and whether that was a borderline Islamophobic comment from Bill Maher saying we should be afraid of the normal seeming Muslims who live amongst us. They could explode at any moment. And also, you can let me know what you think about any of the topics, because that's the end of the show. I got to finish up now. I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out for you. If you want to help support my show beyond what I get from the advertising, I'm currently putting in ads about every 30 minutes because I just hit the $300 mark for my patrons. If you want to become one of my patrons and support me on a monthly basis, there's a little link you can click on. If you hover your mouse around this corner of the video, you'll see a little eye. On the little top part of that eye, you can make a direct donation, and then there's a big part at the bottom here with the LiberalViewer icon where you can become a patron and support me on Patreon if you want to help me keep making these videos through the 2016 election without having to worry about advertising income from YouTube, which they've been demonetizing so many of my videos. I don't really want to go into that, but I appreciate all of you, my 51 patrons who've brought me up to $300 a month. That is totally independent of YouTube advertising. And I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out for you. Like I said, if I have time, I am going to make a edited, produced video this week about Donald Trump versus Fox News and how their war is continuing, and the back and forth and all that if I have time this week. Otherwise, I'll be back next Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific time is my new time for the show. That's Greenwich Mean Time minus 7 hours, if you're wondering what 6 p.m. means. Every Sunday, I pick out the best clips I can, and I hope they left you, beginning your week, a little more informed about what the corporate media thinks is important here in the United States. Although I did leave out the 10th anniversary of Katrina, which was covered by most of the programs, not Fox News really. I left out a couple other topics that they covered, but these were the main topics, especially the 2016 presidential election. Anyway, until next week, or until I have a edited Proust video for you to watch, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.